So we are going to be talking about the idea of prolific production here today. So bunch of questions came in over the last week, and I think the theme over the last month or so, or a couple of months, has been, I think one of the reasons we all find ourselves in the same place has been content and the ability to connect through content and produce a bunch of content that ultimately pulls together a bunch of people that have the same view of the world or have a lot of things in common. So you're making these sort of investments into content, putting them out into the world, and they are devices that bring the kind of people you want in your circle into your circle. So how do you start to produce content that starts to attract the type of people you want to spend time with, do work with, etc., etc.? So spend a lot of time thinking about this after getting that question, and have a little bit of an abstract metaphor to talk about it and think about it, and then we'll get into something a bit more specific or tactical at the end of this conversation. So the first idea is really that, the majority, I would say without exception, probably the idea of the ability to create all this quality content at scale and consistently is really a product of connecting experiences. And I just made this visual earlier today that speaks to like the nodes of experience that exist within each of us as individuals. So as you start, right, you have we're kind of a blank slate, as it were. We have the couple things that are installed as the geography you're born in, the experiences you've had up to a certain point in time. But as you progress, as you collect more experience, as you like pull on these threads that interest you, as you follow your curiosity, you develop a richer tapestry of experiences, opinions. Your point of view just gets more and more complex and interesting over time. So, the people who have written books on books on books, or produced a bunch of movies, or just like prolific content creators, I think have collected a lot of experience, whether that's firsthand, secondhand. They're able to accrue all of these different ideas and experiences and then connect those things in interesting ways. So the next part of this metaphor is really this idea of connection. So you have you can have a very typical set of experiences and then connect them in a very typical way. So there are layers and degrees of nuance that happen as a result of you accruing all these different experiences. So the next part of this metaphor is where it really starts to get interesting. So if you add dimension to this picture, then you get the really unique iterations of your experience. So to like extrapolate that into a bunch of different dimensions, you may have started off, that 4-pronged or 4-corner piece is just like blank slate. When we get to this like multiple dimension version, all these different nodes, it's all of your different interests. There's like a satellite interest here. Maybe there's some central piece that is, driving the connection to all of these things. But essentially this like, it's very meta framework or construct of all these ideas that connect together in a bunch of different ways that exist within your mind, and your ability to connect those things, add new things to that mix, and like layer them together, look at them in different ways. You could rotate this cube or this series of ideas, these connected properties, in a bunch of different ways, and look at this 1,000, 10,000 different ways. So I wanted to start with something that was a bit more abstract, so hopefully gets your mind sort of just tease that up as more of a like framework of how to think about this. So I think if you go too tactical too early with this, then you sort of pinhole yourself, or you end up emulating a bunch of topics that don't necessarily you haven't necessarily accrued naturally. So wasting the work you've done to become who you are is a bad idea. It's just a waste of resources when you're going out to create content that is inherently you. So if you're able to use the stuff that you've already gathered and the experience you have as the fuel for creating content, then, you know, in my experience, that's the most powerful way to keep the machine running. So I wanted to then transition into something that is more specifically, more tactical, more messaging focused, and try and break down what this looks like in my head, and try and also give you guys a formula or a format to extrapolate all of those different experiences, themes, formats that exist in your head too. So I built a little spreadsheet here, and I'll flip my screen share over. And I'm going to switch my share over. So you guys might be familiar with this tool. I kind of reverse engineered this. You could do it from scratch as well, but there's this tool called Vicinitas, which Justin in the group put me onto, and it's essentially a tool that allows you to scrape the last 3,000 tweets of any account on Twitter. So you can just scrape all this stuff and then start to organize it by different categories. So obviously if you want to figure out which of your ideas is the most popular, or the ideas of, you know, whoever's account you want to look at is most popular, then you reorder this tab here. So just been thinking about the themes that consistently come up and trying to reverse engineer this into a formula, because I'll be completely frank, like 90% of the time this stuff is just completely off the cuff, or it's kind of a byproduct of working on something, or it's you know, shower thought, or you wake up in the middle of the night and you think of something and write it down. But I don't think that discounts the fact that it's a product of all of these layers of experiences and points of view and formats and just all the things that you've accrued as an individual. So one of the ways we approach this exercise to build this thing we're calling the Prolific Production Matrix, TM, is just looking at all of the stuff that has been tweeted out over the course of the last probably 6 months or so, a year. So without further ado, the next tab in here, I'll give you access to this, is the off-brand, the matrix itself. So one of the things I started to think about, and if you can take your mind's eye back to that 3D representation that we had in the keynote, those different layers that exist in the Z space could represent different things. And I'm not prescribing that they are one thing or the other, because I don't think prescriptions are the most helpful thing to do in this space. But in thinking about how I've managed to like link a few things together, I think to create something that feels like it's got momentum, but it's really not that much of a departure. It's just, again, if you look at that cube, it's kind of like rotating it, looking at it from a different angle. One is like it leads with a theme, and it may be connected to an old experience or an old a style or a construct that's worked in the past. And like a lot of this stuff isn't happening consciously, but when I built this, I actually think I'm going to start using something like this to get more ideas out faster as well. So actually worked out nicely going through this exercise. So on the left-hand side, you have values. And I think that, again, is somewhat a product of you finding your voice. It doesn't necessarily have to happen in that order, but I think the things that you want to get across in your work, it always helps to articulate that, and then build context on top of that. So the values for the stuff that I put out personally, I think simple, direct, actionable, and objective as possible. And then pillars, if you're familiar with the Trust Accelerator framework that we've dug into a couple of times, then you'll be familiar with this. But those are just different ways to frame up ideas or content with this kind of I'm not sure what word I would use to describe that, but it definitely gives you some direction on how to frame the content. So if you're going to write something that's actionable, then you can evaluate what you write after you've written it and say, okay, can somebody take that, read it, and take action? Aspirational is definitely more of the loftier, story, what happens in the future if X, Y, and Z occurs. Analytical is a way more of a deeper look, or a more like you can scrutinize something and get very detailed about how you pick something apart. And then anthropological is all about how people behave and why people think and act in the way they do. Formats, very simple, written, illustration, audio, video. Everybody has access to these, but obviously you have preferred formats. And then going across the right hand side here, there's just a couple more ideas. So in like half of filling this out was going back and finding some recurring themes here, but honestly I got about halfway down this before looking back at the tweets. So thinking about the themes, the beliefs, the things that have come up, the things that have come up in the work you've done even before you start publishing or writing in public, or any content goes out publicly, you can like look back and connect all of these different ideas and themes and speak to and like really segment them down, and then start to see how their relationships exist between them and create this like set of prompts. So I'll get into that in a second, but trying to separate themes and beliefs from experience. So that then gives you the ability to pick something from each column here. So yeah, Minnow, this is completely broad, like not specific to Twitter at all. I'm doing it as tweets, but it's just completely like any type of content, any momentum you want to create on any platform. If you're able to like map your brain out onto a document like this, the function of this is just to generate ideas faster. So the themes and beliefs then layered with experience. Again, it's like the Venn diagram where your like subconscious starts to make connections between these things. So I think just staring at a blank screen, we can obviously get something done if we do that. But if we're able to like create these prompts that both like help us like dig deeper for the experience we have and the things we've done, the things we believe, but also marry that up unexpectedly, it kind of gives you this very interesting formula and format to create new stuff. And then on the right hand side, the very right hand side here, structure and style, this was reverse engineered. So from some of the tweet formats here, we're just pulling out like the different ways in which to structure content. So contrast, comparison, observation, and then in a couple of the older office hours, you'll see some of these ideas as well coming up. It's the ability to contrast two things, to compare the before and after of something, the now and the next of something, break down a case study. But again, when married with a couple of these different themes, you can get to some really interesting original insights that maybe you wouldn't have stumbled upon naturally yourself. So then I just took a couple of examples here and just took these at random. Actually asked Celia to just pick a few at random, like pick two, make sure they come from like separate columns, one from two from any one of these columns each. And then just started to write. So I think one of the ways I like to think about it is if you can write something compelling as a tweet, 140 character version of something, or 280 characters, whatever it is now, then that idea can be expanded upon. So if you can really distill the idea, then the ability to expand upon it is kind of endless. So I think that's another way that another way you can sort of invert the way you think about that is, there's a tendency to think that we need to create something huge, some massive thesis to begin with, and then you can reverse engineer content out of that big beastly thing. But the reverse is true as well. So one of the really helpful things in creating longer content for us on YouTube or wherever else. So you just go down the Twitter timeline, see the ideas that resonate as these like really compressed thoughts, and then expand upon them. So you could just turn the microphone on, talk about something for 30 minutes and what led you down that rabbit hole and what experiences you've had that are, you know, that validate the idea that you've articulated. You could, you know, do the YouTube version, like one of the whiteboard series that we did. It was all based off of tweets that have a really compressed idea articulated in them, and then you can go out and expand on that idea in the broader medium, the longer format, etc., etc. So a couple ideas in here. You can, like, I'm not going to read these out, but can combine these different things to produce, to connect subject matter in your mind, and then I think let your brain work and think on those two things. And what are the experiences I've had? What is my point of view on this? How would I connect these two things? How would I make an observation about that? And then, you know, you could sit there and just like smash through all of these different combinations. If something doesn't come to mind, switch up the combination, try something again. So the function or the purpose of this spreadsheet is to give you the ability to sort of, and someone actually posted in the Slack just as we were launching this call that they've been trying to figure out what their specialized knowledge is. And, you know, almost every case, it's just a weird combination of interests, skills, and experiences that when you plot them out and you combine them in different ways, you get a totally different angle to tell a story or articulate an insight, think about something in a different way. So again, it's like we've talked about creative constraint on the visual side and creative constraint from a on the visual side, particularly if you're able to limit the elements you're working with in order to create something, then that's gonna put more focus on the quality of the work and your ability to communicate the concept, as opposed to you know, spending 80% of the time working out the stylistic decisions that you're going to make. So an exercise like this just helps you constrain yourself and force yourself to get creative in a certain situation. So pick one from each column, throw it over there, and just write, and you'll start to, you know, clean up your own thinking as you go through those iterations and versions of those thoughts or your responses to those different combinations. So I was gonna either open this up to questions early or do some like live ideation stuff. So I'm easy either way. If anyone has any questions, drop them in to the chat. We can also just mess around with some, like if someone wants to throw a suggestion in the chat as well, we can just kick around some brainstorming stuff too. Cool, Minnow, why don't you give me two things? Thank you, Clay, I appreciate it. Okay, strategy and pain from David. So my brain instantly goes to, like, when I think about the idea of strategy and the way I model strategy in my head, it's like the plan you have or your ability to forecast and think about what the end result should be or the direction you want to head in. And then when I put the word pain next to that, I think it instantly conjures up this idea of like the strategist's dilemma, right? We used to have this saying in our agency called what was it? The only strategy the customer sees is execution. So the idea that my focus on those two combinations would be around the pain of like being a really high level thinker, or, you know, thinking that you thinking in strategy but not executing. So I would like dive really deep into the sort of the chasm that exists between thinking and execution. And like, you know, no matter how good of a strategist you are, like all of your impact is going to be determined by like the action you take when the rubber hits the road, etc., etc. Yeah, that's Sahil. That's a great point. It's like it even conjures up like references to quotes you've heard or things in like, you know, pop culture references. You could lay that over a real story, like the one that's been buzzing around in my head. I'm sure you guys have seen it if you're on the same sort of Twitter circles. I just reading an article just before this, or a Twitter thread or something, on the you know, the Basecamp product that's being launched, the email hey.com. It's like there are these things that are happening in the world that that you can have a perspective on as a result of these combinations as well. So I'm going to put that one in here actually. And what was the other idea we said? Like, hey, yeah. I think there's a Henry Ford quote about, no, is it Henry Ford? Something about beautiful, like the most beautiful strategy. Anyway, I'll get back to that. But what not equal to. So you just start to like figure out what your perspective is, and put that out, A/B test the way you articulate that, because these prompts will give you a perspective on what you think. I don't think, well, my brain doesn't work this way. It's like until you present me with something, I don't necessarily have a reaction to it. So if you're trying to like take all of these themes out of your head and then put them back in a very thoughtful way, where you're just picking out like a couple of points of interest and making new connections. I think because your unique perspective, and even like telling stories and giving real examples of how this is like these things have occurred in your life, I think is another powerful way to think about this. Like there are plenty of instances in my career where you've gone and pitched a strategy that, you know, sells the work, but more often than not doesn't translate to the end product. So another thread of thinking that I would go down there is, you know, the disconnect between what you sell and what you produce in different contexts. Like in a corporate context, like another old corporate saying of ours, sell the dream, deliver the nightmare. Like this massive disconnect between what you're able to accomplish because of the like broken system you're in. So loads of rich content there for sure. Let me just tidy this up a second. I think it also just like helps you round out like what you think. I know a lot of people have that, like speak to that idea of you don't know what you think until you've written it down. And I would also say like you don't know what you think until you like give yourself the restraint to answer a question or answer this like very specific challenge. So if you can create these little micro challenges that are trying to connect to subject matters and get your, you know, your all your experiences kind of mapping to a specific challenge, then your unique perspective kind of comes out as a result of that. Yeah, Winston Churchill, Clay. So however beautiful the strategy, you should occasionally look at the result. Yeah, quite excellent. There's so many good ones. It's like Mike Tyson, everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face. Very good. When you say A/B test those results, you're referring to a specific way you approach using Twitter. Yeah. Yeah, no, there's no like formal process. I would like, I'm talking about with A/B testing, just like the ruthlessness of this being like a free feedback machine. So I've seen no negative results from tweeting out 45 times a day. If you have like these thoughts, even if they're slight iterations on one another and not huge departures from like thematically from one another, then it's just, yeah, I mean, the market is hungry for content. And I think this like blockbuster strategy, unless you go the whole way with, 10,000 word Medium article that you spend weeks researching, then like some of the fastest iterated short form content that I've just thrown out there has like wildly outperformed the stuff that I've sat and worked, hours on articulating and trying to write a thread that links to this idea to that idea. It's more of the sharp and incisive single perspective on something that everybody probably has a perspective on, but hasn't challenged themselves to articulate in their own way. So Minnow asks, have you found forcing the novelty this way has made it valuable for your audience? By valuable, I mean feeling like you're talking to their needs and reading their minds. Yeah, I think what's pretty fascinating about it is once you sort of figured out that there's something about what you're writing that's resonating with people, you can really like, it validates like your experience on some deeper level where you can just continue to unpack what would seemingly be, an idea that you've already talked about. Like if you go into, it's like bizarre how similar some of these ideas are, or how, the construct, even the formats of some of these things. Like this is one of the formats that I'm like always playing around with, this idea of, the two short sentences, use X to do X, use Y to do Z, sell X to Y, sell Y to X. So like these really short ideas that can be unpacked and rewritten, and like almost like you have the thread of responses beneath it have like a different take on it, or a way to like meme it in some strange way. It's like these formats that allow you to create these like, I don't know, very like robust structures that you could just throw new material at. And I think there's two sides to it. I think there is the voice or the way you write, because some people, I think, to go back to this other tab here, the like simplicity and directness and assertiveness of it is attractive to a certain type of person. Like there are plenty of people that would see that and just be completely turned off. Like I don't like anybody that talks in absolutes like that. Like that's a different reader, audience, whatever else. So I think when you find resonance around a style, and I don't have any formal like qualifications in language or anything like that, but everybody sort of develops a writing style somehow, whether that's the environments you've worked in, or the like way you communicate with your friends, or all of these different like nuanced inputs create a writing style. And you don't want to depart from the way you write naturally necessarily, because it becomes really difficult for you to keep keep putting stuff out. So it's really like you combine these inputs, but you put it through the like filter of the way you like to write, or the way you like to talk, or the way you like to produce video content, or something like that. Sorry, it's got very weird dead pixels on my screen here. That's gone. Yeah, Paul. I don't know that specific article, but that it's probably great if he wrote it. I also am a huge fan of a like writing resource. I think Venture Hacks did my favorite. Like yeah. We'll stick that. No, that's not it. This one, I'll stick it in the group, but it's really good, like concise writing. And I know I said like, you know, if you don't write concisely, it's not about forcing that, but obviously becoming a better writer is just, you know, a good amount of it is trying to condense what you're saying. But I think like, if it isn't a like natural personality output, then it's just really difficult to maintain. So yeah, definitely a combination of like finding that novelty input, but it always sort of comes out in your style. Like you throw, nobody reading it sort of knows that you're combining these weird things in the back of your head, or you're using the spreadsheet to figure that stuff out or make those different comparisons and different like contrast these different ideas. But you're definitely using it to keep yourself consistent and just jog you into production. Because we've all sat in front of like the empty tweet box. I know I have, and I'm like, man, I haven't done anything. I haven't like tweeted anything out today. I need to, you know, just at least keep the machine rolling. And sometimes you just stare blankly. But I came into this spreadsheet this afternoon and was like, oh man, I should probably, you know, keep this around for when, you know, inspiration isn't like just flowing. You have this ability to jumpstart. It's like a little bit of a spark plug, or a, you know, some little jolt that you can put into your creative. I'll definitely read that Paul Graham thing there. Thanks, man. So Hill said, could you tie this concept into how you generate your own unique courses? I guess so. I mean, I think it will be hyper specific in that case. And like, if you have that breadth of expertise and you could like niche that down into like smaller products, I think it could be helpful. I think what we've been focusing on the product side kind of encompasses like a lot of this. And after this one, you know, it feels like there's you know, there's going to be some time that passes as we just like amass more experience to package into something else. So the first one, design, is obviously 10-year journey, just like compressed into a 2-day experience. And then this next thing is like, again, 3-4 years of like smashing into barriers and doing things wrong and eventually figuring something out, compressed again. So I think if you went like really narrow, you could probably do that. And there's no reason why this couldn't be a like a idea generation exercise for whatever it is you're trying to do. Write a blog post, or, you know, package up a training of some sort, or you know, a video. Yeah, just like trying to force yourself to recognize those connections in your brain that we don't really recognize as specific knowledge that we have. And that's like super common phenomena, right? Like nobody really knows what they are great at, but if you're able to spend the time to just like really list out, here are the things you've experienced, here are the things you've built, here are the people you know, all of those things, then you're going to expose ideas to yourself that you didn't even really assign a value to until you're able to like externalize them and then re-articulate them, and other people can grab onto them and understand them. So just whatever you can do to help yourself recognize your like unique ability, your unique perspective, I would recommend that you do it. All right. Yeah, so David, you can use the old tweets, but I also think there's like a combination. So David asked, just to clarify the matrix, the left column is static and the themes, experience, style columns would be unique and drawn from patterns from old tweet performance. Is that correct? So it can be, you can use that. Like, I also think there's probably value in, if you don't have like a massive library of stuff to analyze, then just go through this process agnostic of a Twitter timeline. So just like, here are the things I'm interested in. Here are, you know, all of the themes that if I were to write consistently that would come up in that writing. So, you know, listing all of those things out, putting together, experiences. You can keep some of these things if they feel like there are, you know, some of these things are universal. Like if somebody, like, you know, say you're, let's say you're a financial planner and you marry that up with relationships, then you have a very different, like, set of mental images and models and ideas about that versus somebody that sees relationship next to, you know, teaching or digital product or transparency. So like a combination, I think, of just organic input, the things you're interested in and you've done. And, you know, if there are things that you've published that have resonated with people, definitely don't keep them out of this. You should lean into that as well. Does that make sense, David?
Yeah, that's great.
Awesome. Minnow said, what kind of benefits have you seen with Substack? So the Substack is a cool platform. I've definitely like fallen off on the consistency on the email front. I don't know. There's actually just like ran into it or started using Substack because of the I think the ability to publish a podcast was the reason we got into it in the first place, and it was a monetizable newsletter. So before I put much time thinking about the grand strategy, it was like, oh, cool, you could, you know, if you able to grow this to the point where people are interested in it specifically, then you could eventually monetize that attention. And like at the time, I'd never done much email marketing or really understood the medium of email marketing. And now the opportunity is just far bigger to just build audience and, you know, give free content and value away and build a list, as opposed to, you know, monetizing through Substack. So the podcast is really cool. The ability for people to read through your old like chronological posts, so much better than MailChimp or whatever else for that reason, because people can sort of get a preview of the content. So I think you end up with a higher quality subscriber and people know what they're getting themselves into. So that's definitely valuable. And what else? Good analytics. But the one thing is, like, it doesn't have the integrations that I think would start to become useful at this point in time. So we have obviously we have the Shopify store. We have a lot of integration that could have been done, follow-ups, and just even integrating the people who opt in for marketing and things of that nature on Shopify could be added to a master list. Right now I have to do that manually. So unless they open up Substack and like give API access, and that's going to be a little trickier. One other thing I'll show you. Just started messing around with, just to make this point more clearly. Just we have a friend who was using this the other day, so I just started messing around with it. Like, there's no Substack integration for this, but it's a really cool platform that lets you pull all these data points from all of your different social properties. So the Shopify integration has got Google Analytics, Instagram, Twitter, all the good stuff. But there's no email integration here, so that's a little problematic because email is probably one of the most powerful channels that we have to work with. So anyway, this is a cool little software. Haven't really done much with it yet, just imported everything, but hopefully going to pull some interesting insights out of this. What is this, Clay? There's your words. Yeah, I think that's great advice. Just like anything that you can do to stimulate or like surface things that you've done in the past, and like expose your experience back to yourself, because I think that's the biggest weak spot that most of us have is our ability to see objectively what we know or have experienced or have to offer that our colleagues or peers or whoever else don't have that specific experience. So yeah, leaning into what is specifically you is a powerful content marketing strategy. Yeah, thanks, Clay. I think that's the first time I've really thought about it like that, but I think a lot of people need that in order to become more confident in pushing their message out there. So I'm sure there are a few very established techniques for doing that, but the idea of writing down your accomplishments, all of the years, months, hours, things that you've spent your time on and experience you've accrued and things you've accomplished, like linking those things back together and starting to like generate new insight from old ideas is like, I think that's the product of or that's how like people become prolific at content creation. I think people that write music, majority of people that have written the best music in the world probably had some absolute nutty set of experiences that like creates just creates like a different perspective and a different way for them to talk about what they've experienced. Marketing and talking about yourself and your business and your view of the world is no different. It's just a different medium, right? Like how do you like objectively look at the things that make you unique and then use them, leverage them to expose your experience in all of these different ways that ultimately is going to connect you with people that need what you do or want to hear what you have to say or want to work together. So we really underestimate our own experience and our own ability. More often than not, you way undersell yourself. And this is one way I think to help you look at it objectively and start to create without that like bias. And you don't have to publish everything in here either. You could just like fire down this sheet and make a bunch of stuff, and it will lead off in different directions and give you some creative inspiration to do whatever you need to do. Minnow, one last question. Do you think about someone specific when you write the tweets? Is it peers? Is it potential customers, clients? So I was talking to Celia about this the other day. I think the only person I think about is like the person who would be the most offended by what I'm writing is, I think, the person that I think about the most when I write. Because like, how do you bulletproof your argument, or how do you really challenge that what you're writing, that you really believe in what you're writing? So you think about someone with the opposite view, and how do you like galvanize your point of view so you could defend it from every angle, or think about all the attack vectors on something you're writing. I think that really makes you consider what it is you're saying and whether or not you truly believe it to the point where you could defend it. that make sense? Excellent. Good. Good. Yeah. I think that's like a really subconscious thing. And I think it happens after you've been attacked a couple times. It's like, you know, human nature, I think, like, and the people that, you know, continue to, like continue to gain momentum after that, like at a certain point, at a certain size of audience or a certain notoriety, it's just happening all the time. Right. So, there's something in that that really creates some, like, it like turns on a lot of good creative muscles, is trying to think about, like, could I defend this to somebody who believes the opposite that I believe? And, you know, obviously it's all opinion anyway, but you really feel much more confident hitting the blue button once you've done that, once you've run through that little checklist in your head. Yeah. 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 Absolutely. And they're, you know, it's rare, but it's like, we're like linear creatures living in an exponential world. That's the problem, but this also means a lot of upside for everybody if you can navigate your way around it. Cool. Well, this was a superb chat. If there are no other questions, I will return your 11 minutes to you. And I appreciate you being here. Thank you very much, wherever you are. I hope you're safe and well. And we will see you, Mexico. We will see you next week. Thank you so much. Greatly appreciate you spending your time here. So thank you. You'll get this link. We'll throw it into the replay, so you'll have access to it. And would love to hear what you do with this. Please share any experiences you have with it. And it's a pleasure. Thank you all. Bye-bye.